Attackers, Chapter 5, First Part. In front of Dee soared an almost perfectly vertical wall of rock and snow. From here on out, his limbs would serve as his only tools for the climb.
Well, I'm sure you'll manage.
His left hand muttered sleepily.
It's a good 300 yards up to the rocky spot where that aircraft crash landed. There's no lack of bumps and crevices to wrap your fingers around. The problem is over there.
Around 200 yards from the top, the rock face jutted out more than 30 feet.
That's not a problem for you. The real enemy,
The hoarse voice gave a yawn,
is this.
Something white came to rest on the palm of his left hand, then abruptly vanished. A snowflake. Dee turned to his right, northwest. Darkness was busy blanketing the sky. Like a strange gas, dark clouds were spreading toward them.
From the look of that, inside of 10 minutes this mountain's gonna be looking at a blizzard. Or more like a hurricane of snow. Dangerous even for me. Good luck. Hurry up and wake me from this sleep.
Now we're ready to start a little cold weather training before winter sets in. Silence descended. Then a shocked voice inquired in a tone that might even be described as solemn.
That right there, was that a joke?
Saying nothing, Dee lowered the backpack from his shoulder and took out a single iron piton. Clenching it in his teeth, he approached the rock face. Apparently, he'd already decided where he would start his climb. Oh, but Dee was a sight to see. To climb a vertical wall of rock usually required a hammer, pitons, and vast quantities of rope. Dee challenged this rock wall with no rope to save him from a fall, no hammer to drive it in pitons, and no more than that one piton for that matter. It wasn't even clear if he intended to use it. In fact, he kept the piton between his teeth and reached out for the rock wall with both hands. If anyone had been there to see him, they'd likely have let out an admiring sigh. His hands reached for the rock, and without seeming to apply any force at all, he began climbing smoothly. Smoothly? Hell, he began to climb that vertical rock face like a reptile that had lived on that wall for millennia. 100 yards up, he reached the stony overhang. Not reducing speed in the slightest, he moved on to the underside of the rock. His fingers caught hold of the tiniest protrusions and reached into the faintest depressions. All his actions were carried out with lightning speed. Clinging to one knob, he reached his right hand out and touched another outcropping. The rock fell away beneath him. The hunter arched his upper body like a bow. Dee moved with great speed. Taking the piton from between his teeth with his left hand, he jammed it into the rock face. Of the foot-long piece of iron, all but just enough to grip sank into the surface of the rock. Like a black bagworm, Dee hung there by one arm. But a heartbeat later, his body became a spring, and he stuck to the rock face. Less than 2 seconds later, he began to move again. After climbing another 100 yards, he found his back hammered by snowy winds that seemed to have been waiting just for him.
Pretty much made it, eh?
His left hand remarked torpidly. It sounded like someone babbling in their sleep. The wind and snow scattered the words. Page break. Dee was standing on a fairly wide rock shelf. The emotion that should have been radiating from every inch of a gorgeous young man at such a moment wasn't evident in the least. not even struggling for breath, without a single hint of emotion in his eyes. Dee was staring straight ahead, at an object that rested on its side about 20 yards away. With one wing sheared off and its fuselage crumpled, the savaged aircraft bore faint resemblance to its original form. He had finally arrived. Heading toward it, Dee was walking across rocks, still bearing the scars of the crash landing, when a faint sound reached his ears. Gunshots. For only a second he halted, turning his face toward the edge of the rock shelf. But he immediately turned back again and resumed walking forward. Page break. After less than an hour of waiting at the base of the collapsed ridge, the group came under attack by the mountain folk. On seeing how few of them there were, the attackers should have unleashed a fierce fusillade, but they didn't. This wasn't like back on the snowfields. Here, avalanches had to be taken into consideration. Instead, arrows rained down on them. Not surprisingly, both Lilia and Dust were able to deflect any that looked likely to hit themselves. But Dust had to protect Vera and Luri as well. As he was defending them with javelin and axe, an arrow took him through the shoulder. Lilia clucked her tongue. "Set up the refuge," Vera called out to her. "No can do on this slope. Not enough room for its footprint." It'd fall down the ravine. "Should we charge him?" Lilia grinned at Cray's suggestion. "Can you see who we're fighting?" She was entirely correct. No matter how carefully they looked, they could see no sign of anyone out in the endless expanse of white. That was the chameleon suits at work. "We're not Danapiers. We get our heads cut off, and that's all she wrote. Now, if you'll excuse me." "What the hell are you trying to pull?" "I've decided to do my job as best I can. Our association must end here." "What?" "Das Vidania." Knocking down more incoming arrows with her longsword, Lilia made an unexpected dash for the rocky ridge. Luri let out a scream. Throwing herself off the collapsed ridge, the huntress appeared to be committing suicide. In midair, a black globe appeared. The refuge. Lilia's form was engulfed by it. It would have been impossible to keep it from falling down the mountainside if it were set up here, and she probably didn't have enough time to allow the others to get in as well. So her shocking solo effort was somewhat unavoidable. But would even the handiwork of the nobles of civilization be able to survive a drop of several hundred yards into the ravine? Lilia was betting everything on it. Snow billowed up from the bottom of the slope. "Lousy woman." Cray cursed as an arrow jabbed into the ground right in front of him. "How are you faring?" Vera called out. "I'm good," said Dust. "You're not good. You can't use your right arm," Vera countered. "Take the kid and run for it." "Where?" Cray somehow weathered the silence that came next. Their surroundings were already full of arrows. "How about we surrender?" Dust shook his head at Cray's proposal. "You fancy being eaten." "What?" "What do you think the mountain folk eat up on a snow-covered peak like this? The flesh of climbers and fugitives. I've heard when they don't have either of those, they draw lots to see who gets eaten. If they're as hungry as all that, why the hell don't they just move somewhere else then? I don't know much about their circumstances, but they say they were connected to the nobles who used to live on this mountain." "Ever catch any of them down by the foot of the mountain?" "Nope." We have found remains, though. The toothed-up bones of 5 or 6 of them. That's sick. Just then, the world darkened. As flecks of white blew around them, Cray groaned. Just perfect, a snowstorm. Relax. At least we don't have to worry about the cold anymore. Sensing something in Dust's tone, Cray glared at him. But he understood what the man was saying. Now that Lilia had run off and Dust was wounded, they wouldn't be able to hold off their attackers the next time there was an assault. No matter how good Cray was with his dead man's blade, an attack by invisible cannibals would spell certain death. A tinge of despair colored the outlaw's still intrepid face. "Tell me something, Doctor. Does it hurt when you die?" Lurie asked in a trembling voice as Vera lay over him like a shield. "It's all right," she said to him kindly. "It'll all be over soon." Silence enveloped the white world. The next time the killing lust coalesced, death would be unleashed, falling down upon them. Damn it all, Cray groaned. Did he still vainly cling to an urge to fight? The darkness increased in depth. A scream rang out. At the same time, the reports of rifles echoed in the air. What's that? Cray twisted around with the agility of a beast. Something had appeared on the snowfield ahead of them, where the mountain folk lurked. Cray could see one spot where the darkness was unnaturally heavy. Another scream resounded, so mindless it changed the looks on both Dust's and Vera's faces. "Please, help me," someone cried in a human tongue. "Don't come any closer. Stay back." "No." The cry was cut short, and a single gunshot echoed across the snowfield, and then stillness. "Hey, what's going on?" Cray inquired in a low tone. He didn't know how, but the mountain folk had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. That much was certain. But rather than rejoicing, this was cause for whispering. How he knew that, he wasn't sure. "It's coming," Dust said. "What is?" asked Vera. Beside her, Lurie too had his eyes peeled. "The darkness. Look." Cray seemed to understand. A faint darkness enveloped the group's surroundings. A still, denser darkness was slowly closing on where the mountain folk had been. Whatever lay within it had wiped out the mountain folk. It had dealt with cannibals of unparalleled wickedness in mere seconds. At the very least, it seemed unlikely to pay them a friendly call. "Doc," Dust called to the woman, keeping his voice low. "Take care of that kid." Perhaps realizing that the man wasn't talking about defending him, the boy's face went as white as a sheet. First part, and